Hello and welcome to High Caliber TV, your source for figure and model updates every Wednesday and Friday. So today on the workbench I'm going to be doing a quick overview of this figure and why I painted him up the way I did and the significance of him historically. So he is a private of the 3rd Battalion 1st Guards under the command of Major General P. Maitland, who commanded the only brigade that was wholly composed of British units. Every other brigade most of them were commanded by British officers, but they all had incorporated in them some Allied contingent, whether that was German or Belgian. So he was painted with the usual sort of thing, counter-shading the block colors, which were the red and the gray trousers, and then spraying them to completion, using glazes for the block colors, the highlights, and the basic shadows, created definition. And then once that was complete, I sprayed him entirely with a thin coat of Future Floor Wax, which reduces surface tension, allows the oil wash to glide over the surface. And the oil wash consisted of artist oils, ivory black, and burnt umber, and that's of course thinned with mineral spirits. Cleaned it up with mineral spirits after it had had 15 minutes to dry, sealed it with clear flat. Clear flat increases surface tension, and Alan explained to me that if you're trying to apply pigments, the best way to do it is to increase the surface tension because they'll stick where you want them to stick a little bit better. So the pigments I applied to sort of the overall areas, like his elbows, knees, lower leg, on the trousers, some of the places where I pictured he'd like set his equipment down when he was at rest, or when he would have rolled around as he slept. The wash, which was also thin with mineral spirits, was MIG ammo, rubble, and life color golden dark earth. The majority of the wash and the later hand refining was this. So I wanted it to look, I didn't want it to look especially wet. I wanted it to look as if he had had mud drying on him throughout the afternoon, where the weather had been gradually improving on the 18th of June. So the Battle of Waterloo was a culmination of 3 days, and the Anglo-Allied forces had been exposed to harsh weather conditions during the nighttime when they had been sleeping for those 3 evenings. So they couldn't find effective billets or places where they could shelter themselves. Like, they didn't all have tents, which was pretty standard, but they also didn't really have time to erect them because they were in combat readiness. So their officers, there's a lot of accounts of their officers spending their own money to buy furniture from the locals, or window shutters, doors from barns, things like that, that would be broken down and used for firewood. Wherever possible. But I mean, that for a couple thousand people, that was probably pretty hard to keep those fires going adequately. So they would have been pretty cold, pretty tired, wouldn't have had a lot of time to clean their uniforms or apply the characteristic pipe clay to their whites that keep them so stark. But this, on top of the fact that the 1st Guards were engaged with the initial French attack in the early afternoon of the 18th, which was a firefight, column against line, on Mont Saint John. And then once that column had been routed by the decisive cavalry charge, the artillery continued from the French side, so they would have been under artillery fire. Then they repelled the massive cavalry charge, Ney's cavalry charges, being formed in square, which was the tradition. And once Ney's cavalry charges had been defeated, they were again under artillery fire, and at which point Wellington ordered them to lay down, which was a very wise tactic. A lot of forces at the time, especially their Prussian allies, refused to lay down in the face of the enemy, but Wellington knew that if he was going to preserve his force and keep them effective, he needed to keep them protected under the cover of the reverse slope. So the artillery, most of the round shot would bounce on the ground and fly over the heads of the infantry, but if it was case or airburst, which the French had in limited quantities, I believe, it would have still caused massive casualties amongst the tightly packed infantry. So the fact that they're laying down on the ground on their front meant that this figure is probably still, he's dirty, but he's probably a little inaccurate because he would have been covered head to toe in drying mud, because when they laid down, they wouldn't be worried about keeping their uniforms clean, they just would have been worried about staying as low as possible. So I sort of took some liberties and kept the basic outlines of the of this sort of refinery clean, and the, you know, the brass and stuff isn't absolutely drenched in mud. But also the fact that if they had taken casualties or been beside someone who had been hit with the artillery, the people beside them would have been sprayed with viscera. But I thought that would be a little, you know, tasteless to cover this guy's one half with gore. So anyway, moving on. The reason why this figure, I titled him Tallest Man Alive on Facebook, and I have had a few people ask me what that meant. So they had been ordered to lay down, and then in the crescendo of the violence on the third day, Napoleon's last assault consisted of guard units and chasseurs of the guard, and I believe the remaining young guard units that weren't committed to the assault on the Prussian line may have also been in there, but I'm not certain about the young guard. So they advanced in square up the hill towards the ridge where the British were laying down, and just as they were coming up, they couldn't see the British, but they knew they were there. Well, Wellington ordered the units to stand up and begin laying into them. So as the French advanced, they would have seen thousands of British and Allied infantry stand up in front of them, bayonets fixed, and it would have just been a brutal sight to see, because the French knew that they couldn't just decide to leave at that point. They had to continue to move on. There were too many people relying on them in the rear ranks of their formations to advance. So they continued to advance until they got very close, and then a 10-minute firefight broke out. The British, in peninsular fashion, fixed bayonets and advanced in a short charge down the hill, which ultimately broke the French phalanx, and they were withdrawn in confusion down the hill. To which the French forces never actually recovered, other than some of the guard units. They just kept running and were ultimately defeated at that point. So that's the significance in history of this man and his unit, and I just thought that was a really cool release, especially considering this is the 200-year anniversary this year of the Battle of Waterloo. So I thought it was a timely release at the very least by Castle Miniatures. So thanks very much. I hope you enjoyed the brief history that I put into this guy, and the reason why I called him the tallest man alive. So check us out at highcaliberminiatures.com, links in the description below. Follow us on Facebook, Pinterest, and Twitter, and now Instagram. Thanks very much for watching, and I will see you next time.